or television?
Welcome to a very special live edition of the Cross Border Interviews live election night special. I guess I should have written a script before I started doing this, but this is what happens when you actually just try and wing things together on a dime. I am your host, Chris Brown of the Cross Border Interviews, and we will be talking about the 2022 provincial by-election up in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche, where there are 8 candidates vying for the vote. Now, 8 candidates, a lot of time between now and when the official results, but we're going to try to digest it with 4 amazing guests who have decided to jump on very last minute for some of them to come on the show and talk about this by-election, what it means for the province, and what it means for the parties heading into the last year of this government. Now, I'm going to try to introduce these 4, and I'm going to try to pronounce all their names correctly here, and I'm probably not going to accomplish that, but here we go. Here we try. He is the co-host of the Unelectable podcast, Joey Oberhoffner. No? Did I get that right?
Pretty close.
Okay, I got a thumbs up. That's all I care about. Sarah Biggs, the strategist and partner at Olson Biggs, a PR firm here in the city of Calgary. Sarah, thank you for doing this.
Hi, how are you?
Deidre Mitchell McLean. I totally pronounced that name wrong. Deirdre, the co-host of the Women in AB Politics. Deirdre, thank you so much for doing this.
Happy to be here, Chris.
And Susan Timmonson, president of the Alberta Party. Did I get anyone's name right here? Let's just put that out there. Okay, at least we got one person.
You got Sarah's.
Well, it's easy.
Well, if this is how the night is going to start, 3 minutes after polls close, I can imagine what the next hour is going to be like. But let's talk about this. We are 30 days after a by-election call. Polls are now closed. We'll start off with Joey here. Joey, this is a by-election that kind of wasn't a by-election. You didn't see a lot of provincial news about it. The government didn't really talk about this by-election. What was happening? This by-election, what transpired over the last 30 days in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche?
Well, really, Chris, what it boils down to is this was a by-election that the government, for all intents and purposes, was hoping everybody would forget was happening. And the reason for that is because of who their candidate is. And I'm sure that we're going to get into that a lot deeper as the evening goes on. But, the reality is that Jason Kenney really is only holding this by-election because he has to. He doesn't want to. He certainly doesn't need to. And having Brian Jean in a position where he can get on a stage in front of people or get behind a desk at the legislature and start to speak is pretty much the last thing that he wants. So he's calling the by-election because to not do so would be a violation of law. But at the end of the day, he's hoping it's just a formality. People will vote. People will elect who they elect. And then he can focus on what his actual goals are, which is to win his leadership review in 3 weeks and then roll on through to the next provincial election.
Now, Sarah, you and I both know each other. We are a number of people, and I look at numbers like there's no tomorrow. Before we continue, I just want to make a suggestion to everyone. If you're not talking, can you mute yourself for a quick second, just so that way the background noise doesn't come through, just for the audience?
And my apologies. It's me because I got the hockey game on in the background, and so that's all me.
Hockey means nothing right now. Politics is number one. Politics is Canadian pastime.
But the Oilers are up 4-1 already after the first period. It kind of matters. I'm okay.
This is why we brought Susan in, is to talk about hockey, not politics, as the president of the Alberta Party, to talk hockey. But Sarah, I'm a numbers person. You're a numbers person. The advanced vote numbers came out last week. Actually, I think if I'm not mistaken, this weekend. The numbers are down from the 2019 provincial election, but they're up from that 2018 by-election in Fort McMurray, Conklin, when Brian Jean left and Leela Goodridge came in. What does that tell you about what's going on the ground? Is it just by-elections don't get the numbers, or are people more interested in this by-election than the 2018 one?
I think we're dealing with a little bit of voters fatigue here. We just got out of a federal election in September. There's also, by not by waiting at the very last minute to call that election. The premier, either you like it or not, the premier is kind of sending a message of he doesn't seem too interested into what is going to happen here tonight. Today, during the charter school presser, they were asked who he was rooting for, and Mr. Kenney gleefully said that he was cheering for the UCP and not for Mr. Jean. So I think that in a whole is sending a really, really strong message. And maybe the people for McMurray Lac La Biche tonight just feel like they might have been ignored by this government this round.
Now, that's a good point, and I'm going to throw it over to Deirdre here. Deirdre here. This by-election, and I mean this in all respect, because we'll get to the Sue here in a few seconds, but Rachel Notley has COVID-19 for the last 2 weeks, so she's not up in Fort McMurray. Oh, Brian Jean is without Jason Kenney up in Fort McMurray. Barry Morishita is up in Fort McMurray. The two major party leaders are kind of absent in this by-election. Does that say something about the by-election, or does that say something about the chances of winning tonight and they see it as a foregone conclusion?
I mean, kind of all of the above, I think. I think there's a little bit of everything there. Obviously, Rachel Notley is going to be out for the moment, and Jason Kenney, of course, doesn't want to be anywhere near Brian Jean. So I think you just have a situation where Rachel Notley would be there if she could. Jason Kenney could be there, and he isn't. So that's really, I think, all we need to focus on with that.
And I'm going to just stick it here for you for a second, just to give you a little bit more time here. But this by-election, even provincially through the media, wasn't well reported on. As a reporter yourself, as someone who's covered politics over the last few years, do you find that the media just sort of looked the other way when it came to this by-election? And I know traditionally by-elections don't get a lot of play, but with big names like Brian Jean running, you think it would have gotten a little bit more publicity than the Rick Bells and the Calgary Herald and the Edmonton Journals, wouldn't you have?
Well, I mean, so the local papers, it was being covered. Global was doing it, CBC was doing it, but locally, and particularly our papers of record, there wasn't a lot. And so, do I find it odd? Not really. One of the reasons is because this was, no matter how it turns out, someone who opposes Jason Kenney is getting elected tonight. And it's not a normal situation for a by-election where you do have a candidate from your party. But I think there's also, it was dwarfed not only by the fact that no one would say anything about it, right? That's another part. Jason Kenney not being there, the absence of something isn't necessarily a story, right? You can't write about that every day. You can write about it once, but every day it's just kind of like, well, nothing new has happened. And it was dwarfed by a lot of other things going on. So by-elections don't get a ton.
No, and I appreciate that. No, but Sue, you were actually on the ground up in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche. You were there with Barry Morishita, the Alberta Party leader. Talk me through what was happening on the ground. What did you see? What did you feel when you were door knocking with your candidate up there, but also with the leader?
Yeah, I was up there this weekend. I spent Friday, Saturday in Lac La Biche, and then Sunday in Fort McMurray, where it was a balmy -24. The wind chill. It was a lovely weekend. I'm laughing because we're talking about Jason Kenney being up in Fort McMurray, and if Jason Kenney had been up in Fort McMurray, he wouldn't have found his candidate there. So he'd have been by himself. There really wasn't much point in him being up there. From all reports that we got, they were not. Brian Jean was out doing other things. So I think some of the lackluster interest was they do feel it's a foregone conclusion in a lot of ways. But the candidates aren't making a lot of noise either. And that's not their fault. There's lots of stuff going on up there. As to what I felt out there, there were signs. Definitely everybody had signs out.
So
Wild
were people
Rose,
engaged? Were people actually engaged on the ground?
I would say not particularly. Certainly, the doors that we knocked on, we got lots of people, we got a percentage of people that were unaware that they were voting on Tuesday completely, or they knew about it, but they hadn't really decided, or for sure. But, I've knocked on enough doors in enough campaigns to know that, for sure doesn't always mean that they're actually going to get there. So the expectation was pretty low for the percentage of turnout. The municipal campaign, I think that it wasn't, they figured that their turnout was around just over 30% for a municipal campaign. They're just coming out of that municipal campaign. So there's some burnout, especially up there, because they've just done this. And so a lot of, voters often don't know the difference between the municipal campaign and the provincial campaign. So there's some of that. But, I think there were lots of Wild Rose Independence Party signs. Of course, they're branding it as Wild Rose Independence Party. And that was certainly the attitude that we got from a lot of people when they were talking about voting Wild Rose, is they really think that Wild Rose Independence Party is just the Wild Rose Party is back. And that's not the stated purpose of the Wild Rose Independence Party, but that is what so I would be surprised if the Wild Rose Independence Party didn't take a big chunk of the UCP vote up there this time.
Well, let's talk about that. And this is going to be a sort of an open discussion. Whoever wants to jump in first, please just feel free to. But I want to talk about the United Conservative Party. We are seeing the Wild Rose Independence Party. We are seeing the Alberta Advantage Party. We are seeing the Independence Party of Alberta. We are seeing the Statehood Party. The right is getting more fractured as time goes on in this government. And we are not in a time where everyone's going to be singing Kumbaya heading into April 9th in the leadership race. What does the right need to do to get its message back on track as the United Conservative Party? Sarah, if you want to take this one first, go for it.
Yeah, so we've been hearing that there's a lot of issues. Caucus is not necessarily symbiotic right now, and Mr. Kenny's running out of glue to keep it together. And I think that will be reflecting into the electoral votes tonight. Like Sue said, a lot of people will be confusing Wild Rose and Wild Rose Independence Party. So people might be tempted to not necessarily look at the voter's name, but the party name, because let's be honest, a lot of people vote that way. So it's going to be interesting to see. I'm expecting the Wild Rose to go get at least 10 to 15% tonight. They're going to be eating a huge share of Mr. Jean's. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before, but I think that the results tonight will be showing on how divided the caucus is right now and how the UCP is not able to keep everybody under that said big tent that they are trying to keep afloat. So it's really going to be interesting to see, will people vote with names or people will vote by party names? Because back in the days, a lot of people were like blue, red, yes, no, and go ahead. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Name recognition is important, but there's 8 names on the ballot. So Sue is on mute.
Oh yeah, sorry. Your hockey was
such a good point.
Go ahead, Sue.
Fair enough. I'm going to go turn it down after this. I was going to say, from Alberta Party perspective, we hope that they're voting by name, but we know that and expect that there's this pretty good percentage that will vote by party. The Wild Rose Independence has Paul Hinman. He has no connect to Fort McMurray. Yep. The NDP candidate, Adrienne, does, and that's good. Michelle does, that's good. Brian Jean obviously does as well, but he's been pretty absent, and people are noticing that. the other candidates, again, from the other parties, they don't have the local connect. So I hope that people look at those names, but in this one, I suspect that it'll be pretty party based in a lot of ways.
Would it be fair to say that Mr. Jean is kind of sat on it and just hoping that his name recognition will be
absolutely
75% of the work?
Yeah, absolutely. He's got lots of signs. There's lots of signs up there, some big 4x4s, lots of 4x4 signs and lawn signs. But interestingly, I saw hardly any signs on lawns. So of anybody. Most of the signs were just street signs. There was very, very few actual lawn signs. There was a handful.
I'm just going to interject, but it could be because the ground is frozen and it's hard to put lawn signs in lawns when it's minus 24 degrees out. I remember the 2015 and 2019 campaign, and those things were sometimes a bugger to put in the ground.
We were definitely just putting them in snowbanks. It was all snowbank signs. So I say lawn signs. There was no lawns. There were
snowbank signs.
4 feet of snow everywhere.
Joey, I want to talk about Brian Jean's resurgence here. He has made it he does not make it a secret that he does not like Jason Kenney. Brian Jean was not Jason Kenney's UCP candidate in the nomination for the UCP candidacy. Brian Jean is making a name for himself by crisscrossing this province before the April 9th. Is this a good strategy for him to run against Jason Kenney and just say, screw it, I'm going to be the anti-Kenney candidate? As much as people know that I'm running for the UCP, I'm running against Jason Kenney as a UCP?
Well, there's some irony in it, in that this is a page of the playbook that Jason Kenney has used to his own success a great many times. I mean, Jason Kenney traditionally hasn't run against his local opponent. He's run against Justin Trudeau or whoever happens to be leading the Liberals at the time. When Justin Kenney even gives a speech today, he's criticizing Justin Trudeau as much, if not more, than any provincial party leader. So for Brian Jean to say, you know what, I'm the anti-Kenney candidate, really means, in effect, he's saying to anybody who would be otherwise inclined to perhaps vote Liberal, perhaps vote Alberta Party, perhaps vote NDP, perhaps vote for any of the 94 right-wing splinter parties. Hey, if you don't like Kenney, I'm your guy. And as a result, we've seen, I would say Jason Kenney has been avoiding this by-election like the plague. But as it turns out, as we've seen over the last 2 years, avoiding plagues isn't really a thing that we do here. So, you just have to look at the numbers here and say, well, people who like the conservative brand but don't like Jason Kenney are going to vote for Brian Jean. People who don't like the conservative brand and don't like Jason Kenney might still vote for Jean because they feel Jean is a person who could get Kenney out before next spring. And you can do a lot of damage if you're in a position of power in a majority government over the course of 12 months. And then you've got the people who like the conservative movement, but don't trust the party. And this is reminiscent of something we saw in the dying days of the PC dynasty, when you had people say, you know what, I like Jim Prentice, but I just don't trust you guys anymore, the party as a whole. And if people are starting to come to the opinion that they feel the United Conservatives are rotten at the core and it's not a bug, it's a feature, then they're going to start looking at the Wild Rose Independence Party or the Advantage Party or somebody else if they're stalwart conservatives. And if they're more centrist, they'll look at somebody like the Alberta Party or the Liberal Party if they really like losing, and they're going to say, I'm going to go with those guys, but I'm going to give up on the UCP as a whole.
Deirdre, I want to ask you this, and I want to because we've been talking about Jason Kenney, but does Rachel Notley not support Brian Jean winning tonight? I know she has her own candidate, but wouldn't she want Brian Jean in caucus to sort of be that disruptor in chief in the UCP caucus? Because if I'm Rachel Notley, I would love my candidate to win, but in the back of my head, I'm thinking, if Brian Jean wins, it's a win-win situation for the NDP.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, having Brian Jean in the legislature is just going to provide hours and hours of entertainment for the rest of us, including the NDP. I think too that you have this scenario, like Joey was saying, you know, when Brian Jean first came out saying that he was going to run for the UCP, for the nomination, when that actually first started, he was the first one who was able to take over the narrative of I'm the anti-Jason Kenney candidate. He took that away from every other candidate. And that to me was just interesting in general, because that's not how it normally works when you've got a candidate running for you. But so I found that really interesting that he really had that going for him. And it took away from the NDP's even their ability to be like, well, no, we're the anti-Jason Kenney. Well, no, every single person running is an anti-Jason Kenney candidate.
I would like to argue that no matter what happens to Mr. Jean tonight, Mr. Jean did not need that win necessarily to disturb or, kind of scramble the cards on Mr. Kenney's leadership review. We all know that people are working extremely hard in the background with Take Back Alberta.
Yeah.
And that I would be curious to see the total count of MLAs are actually supporting that initiative has been happening. They've been filling up rooms everywhere in rural Alberta. So I think that tonight it would just be a bonus for Mr. Jean to win, to push his effort into disrupting Mr. Kenney's leadership, but he would be able to do it no matter what, because Mr. Kenney right now, they are in panic mode. They are doing the math, and the math is not working to their favors. We're seeing emails circulating, everybody asking staffers to place at least 6 hours of phone banking. Usually when you're asking your staff to do phone banking, it's because you are in troubled waters, especially for leadership. So we'll see. I think that for Mr. Jean tonight, it's just a bonus. And then Mr. Jean tomorrow is going to be driving down to Edmonton guns blazing.
Or as Sue said, he's already in Edmonton waiting to walk into the legislature, so that way Jason Kenney can drag him on the floor.
He's packed. But then we're going to see, it's going to be interesting to see in the next few days who will be rallying behind Mr. Jean. That will be extremely telling to see in the next few days what is going to happen.
But can anybody remember at any point in the recent past a more blatant and obvious leadership opponent being in caucus with the leader? I'm thinking back to Paul Martin, Jean Chrétien as the last time it was that obvious. The next
it's not even that bad though. I was on the Hill. I was around when that happened. When Martin took over after. It was not that nasty. It was not. It had a little bit more class. Yeah. It was done with more, I would say, it was done with a little bit more strategy. Mr. Jean is a bull in a China shop right now, and he knows he's going to cause damage no matter what he does. So
you're right. He's totally going to cause damage no matter what. And I have to say that I was on the provincial board of the PCs when Jason Kenney decided that he was going to launch his leadership bid. Yeah. And, we had an opportunity. His launch of the leadership bid was essentially a takeover and we're going to unite the right and get rid of the PCs and bring everybody together. So essentially he was launching the leadership for a party that he wanted to get rid of. And so the irony of Brian Jean coming in and wanting to challenge him for the leadership in order to get rid of him is kind of sweet irony for me.
There's an argument that could be made also that Mr. Kenney is the populist and Mr. Jean is the conservative. There could be an argument is made.
I've never heard the words Brian Jean, not a populist, come out of anyone's mouth before.
He's a populist.
But the less populist option comparing to what we are seeing right now with the support behind Mr. Kenney.
Yeah, and I mean,
I'm not a contest of who's the less populist at this point.
Yeah.
Who is the most conservative? Who's the more blue?
Neither of them.
I'm not sure, but I'll tell you this. I don't know what a petard is, but Jason Kenney seems to be about to be hoisted by his.
A petard? It's a French word for explosive.
Okay.
Well, he's going to be hoisted by his own explosives.
I know it's been for the first half hour, it's been the let's talk about the UCP, but let's talk about the right as well. The left, I mean, the progressives. And we are seeing the Liberals are running a candidate up in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche. I'll be honest, they don't even have a leader right now, a permanent leader. So this is hard for them to run an effective campaign. The NDP
I didn't see a single sign up there for the Alberta Liberals. There wasn't.
Let's be honest, they probably didn't have a lot of fundraising ability up in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche, even though if you remember back to 1993, the Liberals did hold the riding of Fort McMurray back then, that during the Ralph Klein era. So weirder things have happened. Liberals, Alberta Party, NDP. Two strong parties, one in power, one looking to get power, get into the legislature, and the Liberals are still trying to find a leader. To take on a juggernaut like Jason Kenney, and I mean this with all respect to him because he is an excellent campaigner. He gets in front of a crowd and he can campaign like the Dickens. Does the left need to consolidate around a party and finally say enough is enough? And I'm going to start with Sue here on this one because she is the president of the Alberta Party. And then we'll go to Deidre, then we'll go to Sarah, and then we'll go to Joey. But Sue, does the left need to form a coalition, or having these options on the table, is that good for democracy?
That is democracy. So no. I don't believe that there should be a coalition of any of those things. I didn't believe there should be a coalition on the right. I don't believe there should be a coalition on the left. I think choice is an option that should be presented to the Alberta people. We talk about swinging pendulums and having options that are a bit of both and in the middle. That's a real way too simplistic, but the short answer is no.
I'm going to ask the $1 million question, but what's a win tonight for the Alberta Party? What is the win for? I know a win would be Michelle being the next MLA, but what's an effective win for the party tonight? Is it 10% of the vote? Is it 15% of the vote? Is it second place? What's a win for the Alberta Party?
That's a really good question, and I don't know if I can exactly answer that. Obviously we would prefer that she won. I don't know that that's something that our expectations are there. It really depends on how much fracture is on that right-hand side, right? We know that in the last election, we only had in 2019, we had 5.8% of the vote up in this constituency. So, we're looking to obviously double that. If we can get to 10% and where we are across the province, where we have been, then I think that would be a win. I'm hoping we're higher than that we take closer to 15%, that we'll take the people that can't vote UCP. We came across lots of people that weren't going to touch Brian Jean and won't go to the NDP. So I think that we're that alternative. The NDP were just over 20, or right around 25% last time. And as Sarah mentioned, the UCP were at 66%. They will be nowhere close to that. I'm closer to where you are, Chris, on that. If he's at 35%, I think he'll be at 35%. I think the Wild Rose Independents could be around that 15%, and I would like to have a higher showing than them.
Deirdre, I'm just gonna call you Mitchell McLean for the rest of the interview. That's easier to roll off the tongue for me. But the left is being kind of in this weird place because the NDP have been riding high in the polls, but if tonight shows you that the NDP are still at that 20% from that last provincial campaign, even with them being high in the polls, does that make Rachel Notley have to stand up and go, okay, we have to recalibrate here because we can't be assuming that the polls are going to translate into votes on election day?
I'm hoping that Rachel Notley and her team have been recalibrating since 2019. Because that's when they needed to start recalibrating. it's tough too, because you've got the fact that it's rural, the fact that it's, an oil town. The NDP has come in second, right, over the last couple of years there, or elections. So it's not like it's not like coming in second is a bad thing in Fort McMurray, right? That's not something for them to look at and say, geez, we could have done better.
So the follow-up to that is, what happens if they don't come second tonight? What if that Wild Rose Independence Party vote gets above the Alberta NDP in this by-election? I know by-elections are weird turnouts because they are not a true judgment of what's happening provincially, because more people come out. But what happens if the NDP actually does do worse than the Wild Rose Independence Party?
Well, look at the last time that the government lost half of their vote to a third party. Well, the NDP formed government. So I honestly don't see any scenario where the NDP looks at this and says, that was awful. I mean, unless they actually come in last, there's 8 candidates, there's an independent.
For those who don't know, Brian DeHere. So Brian DeHere ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Alberta. The Green Party of Alberta, Jordan Wilkie came on the show and said they were not running a candidate up in Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche, just because they didn't have enough resources and they want to put it somewhere else. So Brian DeHere, he ran federally for the Green Party of Canada in the 2021 election in Fort McMurray, Cold Lake, and he is running as an independent this time. So that's a little backstory on Brian.
Okay. That actually helps, because I was going to look him up and just try and figure out where he fit in this, this mass of mostly conservative parties. But I honestly don't think that there's a scenario where the NDP looks at it, unless they come in last, as anything but, maybe a little bit of an idea. The turnout in Fort McMurray isn't fantastic. They just hit 58% in 2019. Before that, they were 44%. 2012, they were only 36%. So weirdly, in Fort McMurray, 30% is apparently a good indication of what everyone would do. But yeah, yes, they are weird. And 100% Paul Hinman. I love that you were talking about that, Sue, because the Wild Rose Independence Party, I can't believe they were able to name themselves Wild Rose. That's just amazing to me. But right? And yeah, because the whole reason.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to get Sarah in on this for a second, but the NDP are, like I said, they're in this weird moment in time right now where they are doing well in the polls. If that doesn't translate, if it does show that they do potentially fall to third place, which they could not, they actually did well. If you remember back to that 2018 by-election, they did incredibly well. They had a named candidate, a former councillor, Jane Strode. She came away with 28% of the vote. Leila Goodridge did win with 68%. But the NDP are in this weird place. Well, they want their candidate to win. If they do worse than the last 2 elections, this might spell trouble in those rural ridings that they need to pick up coming into 2023, doesn't it, Sarah?
Yeah, well, first, I don't think the NDP is going to have less vote than the last election. We need to take in consideration the oil downturn that happened since COVID. Well, now we're back up, but if you compare the WTI from last week at $128 and today closed at 96, there's quite an adjustment that's being made right now, and it's quite a differential. Then after that, we need to look into how the pandemic was managed and how were the residents from Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche were treated. They had to fly out. A lot of people were away from their families. It was extremely hard on them. There's also there's always those swing voters that I call them seasonal changes voters. So there's the curriculum. So your usual UCP voter that is all kind of centrist, but decides to vote conservatives because heck, why not? So I think the issues like the curriculum, the other issues that we're seeing into some writings right now with nomination scandals is not helping. But there's no way, I think that the NDP is going to come out a little stronger tonight than what we might expect. And they might even surprise us. I might be a little enthusiastic, but I don't think that Brian Jane's going to be as strong as we think he's going to be. Now, the NDP will have to consolidate all of that support that they lost this past 18 months and try to rebuild that trust and really act like Ms. Notley is ready to lead and she's ready to take over no matter what when it happens. Because if Mr. Kenney decides to call a snap next week, a snap's going to happen. I don't think we need to take it out of the cards quite yet, because I personally don't see Mr. Kenney being able to hold to his leadership and face the consequences of losing. But the NDP needs to adopt a slightly more different language to appeal. They need to modify. So they would need to take, I would say, if I was on their strategy team, I would strongly suggest to the original approach to make them feel like we understand them and that we care about this very region, this very specific region, let's say Fort McMurray. And then you look at the votes for the past 5 elections, and then you build a narrative around what really worked. And the NDP is going to have to be extremely adaptable in the next 12 months to be able to go and score even more points into rural. But I don't think it's all lost for the NDP right now.
I appreciate that, Sarah. Joey, I know we're talking about the Fort McMurray Lac La Biche by-election, but I want to jump over to Saskatchewan for a second, because in the riding of Athabasca, if you remember, it was a very strong NDP hold, NDP riding of Athabasca, and then the Saskatchewan Party comes out of nowhere and wins. Could we see that happen tonight, where a party that has traditionally not done so well, the NDP has never held a riding up in Fort McMurray? Like I said, the last time a non-conservative MLA was elected in Fort McMurray was 1993. Could we potentially see another party come out and win this? Or, as I've said this over and over again, is it a foregone conclusion that a Conservative Party MLA will win tonight?
Well, is it possible? Yes. If your name's on the ballot, you can win. Is it likely? I wouldn't advise you to bet the family's food budget. But that doesn't mean that all is necessarily lost for any of these parties, particularly the parties on the more progressive side of the spectrum. I mean, for them to panic because they can't win Fort McMurray is like the UCP panicking because they can't win Edmonton Strathcona. I mean, just because you can't win here doesn't mean you can't win. By-elections are a great place to try out new strategies, to test candidates, to train your workers so that when the real thing happens, whether that's, as Sarah suggests, potentially happening right away, because Jason Kenney does have the ability to call a snap election if he chooses, or whether it's something that we're dealing with a year from now, at the end of the day, you can't just look at one riding and say, well, that's it, we're no good. Or alternatively, oh, we've got it made in the shade. Nobody's ever won every seat in the legislature. So
in Alberta,
what these parties
I just want to clarify that, because New Brunswick, we all remember what happened in '88 in New Brunswick with Frank McKenna. So I just want to put that out there. '88, '91, whatever that election was.
It's been very close in Alberta too. Yeah.
Yes, it has been. But we look at these situations where these more progressive parties are sort of coalescing and doing what they do. And the reality is, if you want to beat a government, you can do it by one of two ways. You can either beat that government by beating the government, or you can beat that government by letting them beat themselves. And over the course of the last 3 years, the UCP in general, and Jason Kenney specifically, has done a really good job of beating himself. If an election were held tomorrow, the New Democrats could absolutely walk to a majority. They wouldn't really even have to campaign based on the polling numbers. I wouldn't suggest they try that tactic, but based on the polling numbers, it wouldn't be close. So for these parties on the left or the center left to panic and say, oh, we need to blow everything up and start a new party and panic because we can't win Fort McMurray would be about as foolish as a party that had governed relatively successfully for 40 years, throwing itself off a cliff because they lost an election. And who would do that?
Well, it would be like Texas turning blue.
Yes.
You never know. It could happen. What's her name?
You know, we looked at this by-election as a learning thing. We've tested messaging. We've tested what our processes are. We're doing this as a learning process. Not that we're not in it to win it, because you can't run a campaign if you don't believe that that's where you're going.
Well,
but
I just want to mention
a lot of the
that,
messaging.
Sue,
yeah,
this is the first test of Barry Morishita on the national stage, because he is not a known candidate or known quantity outside of anyone who was a mayor for the last 15 years. And we've had him on the show a few times. He's a great guy. We'll invite him back on whenever he wants to. And we'll invite any leader who wants to come back on the show, FYI. But Barry is a unique quantity because he is a former mayor of Brooks. Does that give you some hope that this first by-election is kind of a test run for the larger provincial election heading into 2023, that if he can do well, if he can connect with voters in Fort McMurray, he might have a chance across the board?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a test run for sure. Now we know it's not necessarily it's Fort McMurray. It's a tough place to make a change up there, and it'll be a tough place for, it'll be a tough place to make a change. Let's put it that way. But it doesn't mean that you can't get learnings out of that and find out what's resonating with people. And our message at the door is by-elections are the best place where you don't have to vote strategically. You can actually vote without changing government or being worried about who gets in where, because we heard that a ton in 2019. It was like, oh, we got to get rid of her, but we don't really like him, or, oh God, we can't have him, so we need to go there. And they weren't willing to consider very much else because they were scared of the other. They were scared or mad. And by-elections aren't like that.
But I would like to argue that with the Alberta Party, and the by-election for McMurray as a whole, I don't think that it would be prudent. Well, and what I would do, I don't think it would be prudent to base your campaigning modeling based on what resonated in Fort McMurray, because what would resonate in Fort McMurray won't be resonating in Southwest Calgary. I think
but at the same time, like Sue said, and I apologize for interrupting, Sarah, but you can test out those messaging, right? You can test out that messaging.
But our messaging will always be quite regional because it needs to be, and that's part of Barry's charm and part of Barry's strategy. From his perspective, is to say we don't need to have a one-size-fits-all for the whole province. What works in Fort McMurray doesn't work in Medicine Hat. What works in Medicine Hat doesn't work in Grand Prairie. So to have regional specific messaging within an overarching belief system and values and principles. That's kind of where we're going with that. So when I talk about specific messaging, you're quite right, Sarah.
Do we know if the first graders of Fort McMurray are counting the votes tonight? Because we're 45 minutes in and there's nothing out yet. What is happening?
I think to make that.
Watching the hockey game with Stu.
I know.
They're all cheering on the Oilers.
Between periods, they're going to start counting any minute.
We're 45 minutes in, and absolutely nothing is coming out.
Well, we must have someone on the ground up there that must know what's going on, because Deirdre, you must know someone up in Fort McMurray. Deirdre, don't you? Deirdre? Mitchell McLean?
I'm out of workers. I'm
nothing.
Scrutineers, grade 1. Let's go. I really don't know.
It's reminiscent, actually, Chris, of another by-election that actually ironically featured one of these same candidates, Calgary Glenmore. And when we talk about parties coming out of nowhere, right? Paul Hinman. I mean, Calgary Glenmore had been progressive conservative since Peter Lougheed played quarterback, right? So for Wild Rose to come out of nowhere and yank that away from the PCs with Paul Hinman as their candidate was really something, and that's where we get this idea in part that anything can happen in a by-election. But I was at the PC candidates headquarters that night, waiting for the results to come in, and it was at least an hour before even the scrutineers had anything to tell us. It was just brutal, and I want to make perfectly clear that in no way, shape, or form am I advocating for automated vote counters or electronic voting. Definitely not. But it does start to drive you a little bit crazy as you hit refresh on that webpage.
Especially for a by-election, let's be honest. If we got 30% turnout, they're lucky here. I'm really trying to understand what is the holdup. Like, by 8:30, I would expect to see 6-10 polls starting to come out. Like, out of 62, we still have nothing. It's either they punched out, they went home, and we'll know tomorrow morning.
So what what you're saying is we should have started this live event at like 10 o'clock at night.
Probably.
But I will
say
order after dark.
Yeah, exactly. I will say up in Fort Mac that there was a slightly different feeling up there. It's interesting that we assume up Fort Mac is the same transient city that it always was when it had 30% in general elections in 2012 and that type of thing. But in 2019, it was 58%, which still sounds low for the rest of the province, but it's not bad for Fort McMurray. And I heard it over and over again up there. It was just how the community was actually building, that there was more of a sense of a community up there since the fires and then the floods. And the community discovered that it had to come together in order to be resilient. And so some of that hardship that they've had between the fires, then the floods, and then the downturn has really brought them together as a community. So I'd be surprised. I'm kind of guessing 30% as well, but next general election, I wouldn't be surprised to see them into the 60% turnouts again.
Another refresh.
I want to ask one question, and I'm gonna pose it to Mitchell McLean here, because because I'm gonna keep on pronouncing your name wrong until the day that I die. So, if Brian Jean wins tonight, he goes on to lose the leadership race against Jason Kenney on April 9th. Are we back here 9 months from now in another by-election in Fort McMurray Lac La Biche? Because will he resign and just say, okay, I'm going to go spend time with my family again, like he did in 2018? And when he did in 2006 when he left federal politics as well?
Yes. I was actually thinking of Brian Jean as being like this super incumbent, because the riding was held by UCP. It was also held by Brian Jean. I find it so it makes me a little giddy that Brian Jean is running, that Marilyn Burns, former Wild Rose founder, is running against Brian Jean, former Wild Rose leader. Paul Hinman, former Wild Rose also founder, is running against Brian. Like this little incestuous circle up there right now is just mwah.
So what is that?
Don't do that. That word incest.
So this is going to be a question posed to everyone, and if you want to answer it, go ahead. If you don't.
Does he stick around?
Does he stick around? Yeah. Does he stick around?
I don't know.
Okay.
He doesn't have a great track record.
He never completed the mandate.
I think he does. I think he does stick around, and I'll tell you why. Because even if Jason Kenney pulls off a 50% plus one at his leadership review in April, I mean, the writing's on the wall. He is, barring something incredibly unforeseen, going to get his butt kicked all over the place come next spring, if not sooner. When that happens, Jason Kenney is going to quit. And when Jason Kenney quits, somebody is going to need to step up to lead that party. Brian Jean wants the job. Brian Jean is used to being in opposition and in government. Jason Kenney, really, with the exception of about a year there, after he came back to Alberta to save us from the NDP, who we democratically elected, he hasn't sat in opposition.
You said the D word on this podcast. You're not supposed to say democratically elected.
So he hasn't sat in opposition for an extended period of time since Harper first formed government in 2005. So Jason is used to being in charge and having a big budget to throw around and being an important guy. And unlike Rachel Notley, who took her lumps and said, you know what, we lost, we'll do better, and decided to sit as the leader of the opposition, Jason Kenney has no interest in a downgrade. If he gets defeated or looks like there's no chance of winning, he's going to bolt, and someone's going to need to step up. And Brian Jean sees his opportunity there.
I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
Sarah, then we'll go to Sue.
So let's say Mr. Jean wins the leadership. I'm predicting that with Mr. Kenney's departure, it's going to be the end of the UCP as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
We could see another Wild Rose / PC situation, and the right would be fractured again.
Yeah.
Do you think there would be a possibility that if Mr. Jean's elected tonight, he could walk across the floor with 10 or 12 rural?
He'll definitely walk across the floor and actually form. He'll walk across the floor to the Wild Rose Independents, and he'll pull 6 to 9 MLAs with him, and he'll sit as a Wild Rose independent.
All you need right now, you have 3 sitting on the other side of the aisle. You got Barnes. I'm sorry, I forget.
Barnes, Lowen, and Thomas Dang, who would never sit with Brian Jean if you paid him, probably.
Yeah. No, but really all you need is $5 and a shingle to be able to start, and you recognize party. So
they're on the right, and Brian Jean knows it very well from Deb Gray when she and the splinter group of Canadian Alliance members of Parliament decided that Stockwell Day wasn't going to be the one who got them there, and they formed their own independent caucus.
I remember that.
Democratic Reform Caucus.
There you go. So it's very possible that he would take that step.
So that would
as a way of being the principled alternative. And the Democratic Reform Caucus could make the argument very, very strongly that they are the reason that the Conservative Party of Canada eventually formed government, because otherwise they would have been stuck with a loser leader.
So we talk about floor crossing. I'm assuming everyone here is on Twitter, because that's how we all connected with each other to do this tonight. But I found it quite interesting. 2 hours before polls close, the MLA for Chestermere Strathmore released a tweet and a video saying that there is a upcoming leadership review, and you have to have your membership and be a member in good standing and buy your tickets before March 19th to vote in the leadership review. She did not come out, and Leela here did not come out and say vote against Kenney or vote for Kenney, but as the only person on this panel who actually lives in that riding, I will ask the question, what does Leela hear? Why would you release a video like this on by-election night, where your former leader, Brian Jean, the Wild Rose, which she is very chummy with, she endorsed during the UCP leadership race. Why would she have released a video like this, Deirdre?
I do believe that they are still close. They have remained close. Leela had a number of events in her riding specifically. I believe I went to 2 in one day, actually. Weird. Yeah. Anyways, but when the leadership race, the UCP leadership race was on, she was working doors. She was working her contacts. I believe that she, really respects Brian Jean. Now, as part of the UCP, as someone who's already going to be facing a nomination race, there's been some messy things going on with her board. There's a lot of issues going on in her riding that are targeting her specifically. And so, this allows this is something that allowed her to kind of, I guess, pop out for a little bit, because we haven't heard much from her since she was demoted or lost her cabinet seat, whatever you want to call it. So we haven't really heard much from her. I think this is a way to remind people that, she's still here. She doesn't get in any trouble for it. But who knows? Maybe it was a hello to people who are paying attention today.
But I think that Leela is leading her own battle right now as well, and she's been extremely busy with that.
Yeah.
Trying to fight the takeover and just really trying to survive in her own writing.
Yeah, we do have some results that just came in. Only 5 polls, but proof that the website actually works.
Speed
so there
of
we go.
business.
How did yours refresh before mine refreshed?
So the results are, Brian Jean is leading right now with 65% of the vote. Yet again, this is 5 polls in. Ariana Mancini, the Alberta NDP, has 17.8. Paul Hinman with 9.7. Liberal Party has 12 votes. Michelle I'm you know what? I'm just
Landseidel.
I'm just going to say parties because I'm bad with names, as we can tell on this show. Alberta Party with 3%. Brian Tahir, I can pronounce his name right, 1%. Independence Party and the Alberta Advantage Party are sitting at about 0%, with Stephen Malott of the Independence Party with that 3.3%. Now, these are really early results. We do not know where they're from. They could be from Fort McMurray. They could be from rural areas. I don't know. So I don't want to second guess where these are from. But 65% is quite a astonishing number so early on. Yet again, I know it's still early on. We'll start with Joey, and then we'll hit Sarah, then we'll go in the rotation. Joey, what's your first initial thoughts on these numbers?
Well, I'm not overly surprised by them. As with many of these situations, I imagine what we're seeing is results from smaller areas, smaller polls where a smaller number of people voted. Right, the advanced polls, the ballot boxes that are stuffed to overflowing, those are going to be the last ones because they need to be counted multiple times. You need all the scrutineers in the room, all that good stuff. It's not surprising to me at all. But then again, neither is what we were just talking about. The idea of UCP MLAs encouraging people to buy memberships in order to vote at the leadership review. And just as we speak, we've had more results come in. So I'm going to stop talking.
Damn, I'm lagged.
Sarah, Brian Jean looks, and yet again, I was just corrected via YouTube. We can figure out where the results are coming in. I just looked at it. These are all rural areas of Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche. Conklin has come in as well. But Brian Jean looks like he's out to a very early, sustainable lead with 66% of the vote.
And, Paul Hinman with the Wild Rose at 11% is right where I was expecting him to be.
It looks like Paul Hinman's taking from the NDP, actually. If you look at the numbers.
Which doesn't make sense, though, to me.
Oh, it doesn't, I'm looking at the numbers like you are.
This is the year that nothing makes sense, and I want my 90-day refund, please, and thank you. But, Jane is going up. Jane is at 67%. Almost 68. I was hoping, well, not hoping, but I was projecting that Jane would have been at 45 due to the current political climate, with the Wild Rose Independence kind of taking some votes from him. Also, the Alberta Party, if they would have taken 5 or 10%, that would have made a difference as well. But I don't know what's happening. What is happening? Like, those numbers right now, they don't make sense, because the Wild Rose Independence Party should be the last one to be taking votes from the NDP. Okay. Not to make sense.
Do you want to hear a story, Sarah?
Tell me.
Well, hopefully we all can be involved in this story, because we're all listening to this story, and then we'll jump to Sue
hopefully
about
this
the
is
Alberta
helpful
Party.
For more than. So In 2015, that was the change election.
Yeah.
And if you talk to, I was not on the doors in 2015. I just discovered politics that year. So anyways, so I was not on doors, but people who were, particularly NDP, organizers and people who had been on the doors for the NDP before, were absolutely stunned when they were going to doors and having people say, well, the Wildrose candidate looks like they'll beat the PCs, but if the NDP, like, we will vote for them as well, whoever's going to beat the PCs. And this was absolutely shattering for the partisan, longtime supporters, because they're like, how can you possibly decide to vote for either of, like, this is not an equal choice, so to speak. But this is, so people who want change, if they do want change in Fort McMurray, they might be looking at the Wildrose candidate saying, they're the ones who are going to get, like, they're the ones who will get rid of the UCP if that's someone they don't like.
No, I appreciate
and I'm sorry.
That. Sue, I'm going to throw it over to you for a second here. The Alberta Party is right now in 5th place. Probably not the best spot to be at this early in the night, but yet again, it is still 14 polls out of 62 reporting. What's your thoughts? What's going through your head right now as people are seeing these results come in live time? And FYI, just before you mention that, we did have a joke on YouTube Live that the people in Fort McMurray Lac La Biche forgot about the time change, so they're trying to catch up on that whole thing. But Sue, what do you think about these numbers for the Alberta Party right now?
So the polls closed at 9:00 then, did they?
Yeah, exactly. They closed 3 minutes ago. That's why we're getting all these rushes for poll results.
Now they're all coming in. It's disappointing for us for sure. Not on Michelle. It's just that, we're still in that polarized attitude. And so I'm hoping, from what I see on here, I'm just kind of scrolling through. A lot of what I'm seeing is that it's some of the rural reporting that's coming in first versus the actual cities. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm not going to judge yet.
Mancini is up by 2%. The Wildrose is up by 2%, and Brian Jane is down by 2%.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm
But
going to ask the $1 million question. I've asked a lot of $1 million questions if you haven't listened to my show before. So if you have, I apologize. I'm a multi-billionaire according to my show, but I'm going to ask the $1 million question here. This is a bad night for a lot of people, because a lot of people were not expecting it to be this much of a landslide, me included. I will be honest, I did not expect Brian Jean to get over 50%. So Joey, I
didn't think he'd get over 40%.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Are people just going out because Jean is the candidate that they want, or are people going out because we hate Jason Kenney that much? And that's the question I have to ask everyone. Are these results the we don't like Jason Kenney results, or are these results the we love Brian Jean results?
Well, I think it's a little a column A and a little a column B, not to be a centrist about it. But I mean, the reality is Brian Jean is a deeply popular politician with deep roots in the area, and local campaigns do matter. I wish they mattered more, but as much as they're not the be all and end all, they do still matter. So the fact that it's Brian Jean's name on the ballot makes a difference. Now, all of that said, if it was my name or your name or Sue's name, if they had run a campaign of I am a conservative who hates Jason Kenney and hates his health restrictions and hates his PC cronyism, we'd probably be polling up around 60% today too. The reality is you got a lot of people who normally would be inclined to vote NDP, normally would be inclined to vote anything else, who are coming out to the polls and saying, I just want to get rid of this guy. So they're lending their vote for the next year. They're lending their vote to Brian Jean in the hopes of getting rid of Jason Kenney. And the people who are true blue United Conservatives who love Jason Kenney, I'm sure there's a handful of them from Fort McMurray, they stayed home today because they didn't have anybody for whom they could vote. So Brian Jean's numbers on the whole look down compared to the UCP the last time we counted ballots in this riding. But a lot of those voters stayed home, and new voters have stepped up to cast ballots. And the reason they're there is because they hate Jason Kenney.
But see, Mancini's up at 19% right now. She keeps going up consistently.
But not enough to make up a 50-point or a 40-point deficit.
Yeah, but there's only a third of the polls that open. There's a lot of teachers and nurses out there. I'm curious what's going to happen.
Plus, at the same time, we have to remember, just under 2,000 people voted in advance voting. We have not even hit that number yet in the total votes cast today. So
if they all vote for Marilyn Burns, she's in first right now.
So
she gets a vote.
There's 5.6% of the votes that have been counted right now.
Yeah, we're still really low.
Turnout is extremely low. There's only 6% of the eligible voters that has turned out so far, that we have counted votes for. I think we're gonna see Mancini in the high 20s, and Jean's gonna lower around the 45-50 mark. I think, and the Wild Girl's gonna be the wild card tonight.
Oh.
I'm going to be the first to say this, and this is probably going to piss off a lot of people in my husband's realm, anyone who knows my husband, but I'm going to say Brian Jean wins this thing after the first 20 results. I know things could change, but I'm projecting Brian Jean is going to win this thing. Would everyone agree with that sentiment, or am I completely up creek without a paddle here?
Yeah, he's going to win.
Everyone agrees, yeah.
So for those who are watching via YouTube, I made a special graphic for this. So right now, the cross-border interviews with Chris Brown is projecting Brian Jean will be elected the next MLA. That's right. I'm beating CTV to the punch here. Brian Jean will be the next MLA for Fort McMurray, Lac La Biche. So he is heading back to the legislature. So how's Jason Kenney's Wednesday morning feeling?
A little rough.
He won't be surprised.
No.
Oh.
No, and it was always.
That's right there.
It was always, I think it was always Brian Jean's to lose, right? And again, it's also figuring out, especially when you're not from the particular riding. So I think this happened in 2015 with David Kahn, the leader of the Alberta Liberal Party, was running in David Swan's old riding of Calgary Mountain View. And we were all looking at it going, so did Calgary Mountain View vote David Swan, or did they vote Alberta Liberal? And we found out that apparently they vote Kathleen Ganley. So apparently the point is that they voted David Swan. And so in a riding like Fort McMurray, where Brian Jean, has been an incumbent candidate, where Brian Jean is well known, is it the UCP? Is it Brian Jean? That's always something that you're kind of in a bit of a toss up too. And especially in by-elections, quite often those candidates really they're not actually star candidates running in by-elections, right? By-elections usually happen when, people are still building their profiles to run in the general. You end up with people who are just like, sure, I'll throw my name on the ballot for you, but they're not Brian Jean in Fort McMurray. So it's hard to figure out, why Brian Jean or why UCP. There's a lot of ifs in that question.
I think it's the Brian Jean vote, not a UCP vote. That would be my
that would be my gut feeling too.
And I think that's what it came down to. I think a lot of people and a lot of pundits like myself and people on this panel assume that there was a major rush of people anti-Kenney, so they would go to other parties. But it seems like people just like Brian Jean up in Fort McMurray. Maybe it's because of his commitment after the floodings, after the fires, but Brian Jean is back in his old job, and that's kind of weird saying that 4 years after he resigned, but he's back in as the member of the Legislative Assembly. And
well, Chris, I've got a lot of relatives up in the riding, and these are pragmatic people, right? So I think this is a case of them looking at their options and going, okay, I'm at this polling place because I hate Jason. Okay, and now if I hate Jason, I have a bunch of options on this ballot who, if they were to win, would get to stand up once every 2 or 3 weeks that the legislature is in session and talk about how much they hate Jason and then sit down, and that would be the end of it. Or I can elect a guy who's going after the king. I can elect a guy who's trying to get Jason out of here next month. What is the more pragmatic choice? And there's not much doubt which way people are leaning in terms of what the best way to get rid of this guy is. It's to, make sure that the calls are coming from inside the house.
Yeah, and I even think that a lot of the NDP voters just said we're gonna mess with them. We'll make sure Kenny's gone. So maybe I'm thinking a little too much here, but if I would be a Fort McMurray voter voting for the NDP, I hate Jason Kenney, I want him gone, I would have maybe used my vote to make sure Brian Jean is elected tonight. Then Mr. Jean takes the lead of the UCP because he got rid of Mr. Kenney. Then the party fractures. Then I'm going to go back on voting NDP next election because I'm going to be hoping that the right vote is going to be split up again. That could be a voting strategy that we could have seen again tonight. But what do I know?
So we are coming up to almost 50% of the polls reporting, and I just want to give everyone a quick update because we'll start wrapping this up as we've just declared projected a winner on the show, which we are totally capable of doing as the cross-border interviews with Chris Brown. But Brian Jean currently sits at 66.7%. The NDP sit at 16%. Wild Rose Independents with Paul Hinman at 12%. The Liberal Party at 1.6%. Alberta Party in 5th with 1.3%. Brian Tahir in the Independents with 1.1%. The Independence Party and the Alberta Advantage Party are hovering at that 0%. Yes, Marilyn Burns does have votes now. She has a total of 4 votes in that riding. I was hoping that Joey was going to say that was his family, but I guess not. So
most emphatically not.
But let's do one last round here because it is about 9:15 and I told everyone 45 minutes on the show, but let's just do one round. We'll start backwards and work our way around. Sue.
And it's the third period.
Third period. There you go. Everyone can go watch the hockey game after this because this is probably less exciting than the Alberta Edmonton Oilers game. But Sue, what's your final parting thoughts on this by-election in Fort McMurray Lac La Biche?
Final thoughts. I am hoping that we have a little bit of a resurgence as we get into the actual city of Fort McMurray. I think that's where Michelle has an awful lot of connections, and the people know her well. She ran as a municipal candidate, and so I expect to see that bump in there. So that's my optimistic nature. At this point, I would sure like to get to that 8 or 9%. I think that would be our goal for Michelle once we hit into Fort McMurray. But boy, those numbers, that vote turnout is low. If we're almost at 50% of the polls, which we are, and we're not even at 2,000 votes, that's incredible. So we'll see. I cannot be disappointed in Michelle as our candidate, and so I can't be disappointed in our outcome.
Miss Mitchell McLean. That's right. I'm still not using your first name because I'm trying to just make it look like I actually respect people and call them Mr. or Mrs. But Mrs. Mitchell McLean, your parting thoughts on this by-election night?
I'm not really surprised. Sarah and I were kind of talking one day recently about, bold predictions in elections, and it was like you couldn't make a bold prediction about this particular by-election. I went over like by-elections are funny. Dave Corday actually wrote one as well today where he was looking at a bunch of different by-elections. By-elections are funny things. They could have an upset. They're probably the best place that you might get an upset because the turnout is so low. If you have supporters behind you, you could win a by-election. So it could have, right? Things could have happened. They didn't, but I didn't really expect them to. Again, not with Brian Jean. If it wasn't Brian Jean, it could have been in a way more exciting, but it was Brian Jean in Fort McMurray. What was really going to happen?
Alberta Liberals.
Piper in Portland. It's Brett and Cal.
I just want to just some news that came across Twitter right now. Brian Jean is expected to give a speech here in a few minutes where he's claiming victory in the Fort McMurray Lac La Biche by-election. I'm just putting this out there right now. Cross-border interviews with Chris Brown was the first to reject it, so there you go, CTV and Global. So there, just putting that out there. Our scientific crew here at the show, our dogs projected it. Sarah, what's your final thoughts on this by-election night and the election that kind of wasn't an election because it sort of was a fizzle at the end of the day? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. It makes me sad to see such a low turnout when the outcome of this election could be so consequential on the future of our premier in this province. But you do you, Fort McMurray Lac La Biche, I guess. But I think the NDP is going to have to go back to the drawing board and really reassess their strategy. I understand that they probably haven't put as much energy or not as much resources. So I think the NDP is going to really have to go to the drawing board. Alberta Party, I wish you guys had a better showing tonight. I'm sorry. But those damn centrists, gotta go get them. I'm one of them. I'm probably gonna be yelled at by the ladies of Twitter tonight for that. But it's nothing surprising. I thought it would win with a little less. The Wild Rose Independence Party is doing just as well as what I thought. They're just, it's
fascinating that they're taking from a different place than we expected.
But maybe not even.
Maybe.
It's a by-election and people want to get rid of Jason Kenney. He got minus 46% today into how he managed a pandemic. That speaks volume. His leadership, his popularity is so low. He's stuck in the corner, and tomorrow I can't wait for caucus meeting on Thursday. My popcorn's ready.
Who's tuning into the Western Standard on Thursday morning to see what leaks come out of the caucus?
I might just go see DFib and be like, hey, do you want to have coffee? You blocked me, but that's okay. So we'll see what's going to happen this week, but surprising tonight? Absolutely not.
Joey, what about yourself? Final words on this election. And I just want to make sure that people know, for those who are holding onto the edge of the seats, Marilyn Burns now has 9 votes, and she is tied with Stephen Malott of the Independence Party, both with 9 votes each. So that's the story I'm telling tonight.
And the Alberta Party is tied with the Libs, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
I just refreshed, or mine just refreshed, and we actually have 5 more votes than the Liberals. So apparently that's what I'm cheering for right now.
Who says one vote doesn't matter? Chris, I mean, it's hard to take any strong message out of a by-election with a turnout that looks like it's on pace to hit about 17%. Right? I mean, it would be easy to say this is a strong repudiation of Jason Kenney's leadership. But the reality is, if 17% of people show up, you can get just about anybody elected if you have half of a decently organized campaign. Anybody in this chat could win an election that had 17% turnout with about 2 days to plan it. So,
Joey. I ran as a Liberal Party of Canada candidate in Northern Alberta. I barely got 13%. I had no chance of winning with 17%, okay?
And anybody on this panel, with the exception of Chris, could win an election with that kind of turnout. But I mean, right, the interesting story is what comes next, right? We've got a month until this special general meeting where they're going to call the question on whether or not there should be a leadership review. Jason Kenney's indicated he's going to stay if there's 50% plus one. If he does, that is a death knell for his party. I think if I'm the NDP, I'm hoping he survives by the skin of his teeth, because I would really like, if I'm Rachel Notley, to be running against that guy instead of somebody who can try and distance themselves from Jason's decisions. And just to put this into perspective, this is what we in the business call a callback. The Oilers were ahead 4-1, and now it's a 5-5 tie.
I saw. It's because I'm not watching.
Okay. Now, I'm the biggest Oiler fan you're going to find, Sue, but the wheels are falling off the Oilers in this game. The wheels have started to fall off.
Joey, you are the farthest thing from an Oilers fan that's sitting at this table.
Oh, don't even go there.
Sorry, guys. I'm a Habs fan.
You want to see my tattoo?
I'm a Ducks fan, so don't even try to do that. I'm a Ducks fan from northern Alberta.
Oh.
Man, this went sideways fast.
But I mean, Jason Kenney's having a bad night. Jason Kenney's going to have a bad week. And if, as has been suggested here, we see a renewal of the Democratic Reform Caucus or something along that lines, and we see an actual splintering of the not so united Conservative caucus, Jason Kenney could be in for a very, very bad month.
Bad year. It's the Ides of March, everyone.
Yeah.
Happy March 15th.
This time of year didn't go very well for Alison Redford either.
No.
I'm going to leave on this. I think this is going to be the first time that the collective province of Alberta turns into the Alberta Legislature TV and watches Brian Jean introduce Jason Kenney introduce Brian Jean on the floor of the floor of the Legislative Assembly as the next MLA for Fort McMurray Lac La Biche, and say it with a straight face, because we will all know behind the scenes Jason Kenney is probably shaking in his boots tonight. And I could be wrong. Maybe he's happy Brian Jean's in the party and he'll give him a cabinet post. But anyway, that's my
I'm betting he won't even say his name. I bet he just introduces them as the new MLA from Missouri.
I think the chief of staff right now is booking an appointment for Jason that day. So Jason Nixon will have to do the introduction.
Ooh, good one.
Or Tony Yao. I want to thank all four of you for doing this tonight. I know I said 45 minutes, but the counting of the numbers were a little bit later than I expected. Thank you for everyone for tuning in. Joey, Sarah, Deirdre, Sue. Thank you all for doing this. This has been a fun hour and a half sitting and chatting politics. I will forever be known as the guy who first called the election for Brian Jean in 2022, even though it's not totally really realistic. But thank you. And for those who are watching right now, thank you for tuning in. We've had a fun night. We've had lots of chats, lots of talk about the future of the parties. And as of my last words is Brian Jean currently sits at 65% of the total vote. There's 42 polls out of 62 polls, so there's still 20 polls left. But it does look like, as I said before, Brian Jean is projected to win as the next MLA for Fort McMurray Lac La Biche. Thank you all for doing this. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
See you.
I'm going to go hit some cheap liquor now.
Gotta go cheer.
That's how we end the live stream. We're going to go get some cheap liquor now.